There is one universal test that we will all experience from time to time in our manifestation journeys. And once you overcome this test, once you pass this test, your manifestation is as good as yours before you know it. Now, before we get into what this test is, I do want to give you a little disclaimer. This test that I'm about to explain to you is nothing scary. It's nothing huge. It's nothing really to concern yourself with. It's just a small way that the human mind works that I want to make clear to you so that you can pass every single time. So please don't watch this video in fear that I'm going to tell you something like The Purge, where it has to destroy in order for it to create. It's nothing like that. It doesn't have anything to do with what the 3D will reflect. Like I said, it is a test of the human mind. So please watch this video with optimism and not fear, because I'm here to empower you, never put you down. But what is this test then? Well, this test is resistance. Now, many people will explain resistance in their multitude of different ways across the LOA community. But I'm here today to bring you my version of what resistance is and how I understand it and how I overcome it, so that you can overcome this form of resistance and this form of kickback from the mind. Now, like I said, it's a human mind process. It's the way the mind works. And what I'm talking about is how the mind will kick back at you when it's saying things like, oh, you're lying, or if that was really true, you'd have it, when you're affirming or visualizing or scripting or doing any of those kinds of techniques. Now, the deep dive reason as to why our mind does this to us is because when the subconscious mind has a story internalized, that is the basis for what it uses to create our reality on the external. So when you start affirming new stories, you are essentially testing the knowledge, the information, the stories that it has stored. Now, your human ego, not your ego as in you're an egotistical person, but the human ego is in place to keep us safe. And safety comes from predictability. So when we have a story stored internally, a way of thinking, a way of acting, a way of feeling, it is comfortable and predictable. Now, you may not necessarily enjoy or feel good about this story, but your ego does not understand that it is a bad or good thing. It just understands that this is familiar to us, therefore this is what we are going to feel safe doing or comfortable doing. It's why so many people that enter the victim state tend to stay there. It's not fun being a victim. I've been there before, I can assure you of that. But it's comfortable, it's predictable, therefore it is safer than breaking out of that position. So the test comes when you do start to break out of there. Because as soon as you start to tell yourself new stories through your affirmations, whether it's about your self-concept or about a specific person or a job or whatever it is, you are now essentially testing the stories that your subconscious mind has stored and entering a new space of unfamiliarity, unpredictability. So therefore your human ego, the side of you that wants to keep you in this nice little bubble because it's a lot more predictable, flares up and essentially red alerts go off. Now, that is often when your mind will kick back saying things like, that's a lie, or if you had it, you know, if it was yours, you would have XYZ thing, or if it was yours, where is it? Or if he wanted to, he would. Things like that. It is essentially flaring off, trying to quote unquote prove to you how false your new statement or visualization or scripting is, to stop you from branching down that pathway, because it is unpredictable, therefore it is unsafe, or it deems it as unsafe. Obviously, to you and I, logically, it's not unsafe to affirm being in a relationship, but the human ego hasn't quite developed to understand that. It just understands that this is a new space, therefore it's unpredictable, therefore I would rather stay where I am now. So it flares off all of these thoughts like, you know, you're lying, or if you had it you would, or if he wanted to he would, and things like that. That is the test. That is when it is a make or break for how you overcome that situation. If you allow yourself to be internally affected by what your human ego is flaring up with, you have essentially failed the test. Now, why have you failed the test? Well, as I always mention across my videos, it's not what comes up, it's where you take it. If you have a thought come up and it aligns with some undesired story, that isn't what matters. Even the richest people on the planet will have the odd thought about, oh God, what if I lost it all? But because they are rich, they just brush that thought off and associate with how rich they are. So clearly it isn't the thought that comes up that matters, it's where we take it. So if your human ego tries to hold you in place by flaring up some kind of thing, let's just use the example of you're lying, you don't have that. If you go down that path and you start feeling crap because you don't have it, you start going, oh yeah, you don't have it, or you start feeling anxious about not having it, or essentially you go down the path that your human ego is leading you down, you are showing your subconscious mind, you know what, I actually don't have it because look at how I'm associating with this story. Therefore, you have failed that test. But on the flip side of that, if a thought comes up, if the ego flares something in front of you, tests you, for want of a better term, and you can catch it and say, what am I even thinking about? I have insert desire. You are essentially doing, like the example of the rich person, you are becoming aware of what thought has come up, but you are not associating with it. You are not embodying the state of that thought being true. In fact, you're doing the opposite. You're saying, no, I don't associate with that. That is not my truth, because, and then with whatever it is, whether it's a visualization, affirmation, script, whatever you're doing, that thing is true. And then you're going down that path. Therefore, in that moment, you have passed that test. If you can rinse and repeat this process every time one of those thoughts comes up, you are going to be continuously passing the test. Now, the great thing about the subconscious mind and about the ego and about human nature is the more you do something, the more familiar it becomes. Think of, for those of you that drive, the first time you got in the car, it was terrifying. You were constantly stalling, you were checking both sides about 1,000,000 times before you pulled out, you were slamming on the brakes too hard, jolting every time you broke or braked, you would change gear too fast and the car would do that little jut thing if you're a manual driver. Just, it was a mess. But over the days, the weeks, the months, the more you got in that car, the more familiar it became. Until you got to a point where you don't even think about it now. You just like subconsciously know, oh, there's a car coming, I won't pull out yet. You're not actively thinking, oh, don't pull out, there's a car. But your body and mind just know not to do it. It became familiar through repetition to the point where you became essentially an expert at driving, and now you don't even have to consciously think about it. That's because you passed the tests that you were provided within your lessons. This thing that I'm talking about right now is the exact same. The more that you pass the tests of your human ego flaring up, the more you are going down that path of the new story, the more you are showing your subconscious mind that new story to be truth. Now, what happens when the subconscious mind has a new story to become truth? Well, first off, we start getting results. We'll start having signs, we'll start having movements, we'll start getting things, which helps us believe it. But second of all, and obviously that has its own implications of belief and actualization and such, but the second thing is it becomes familiar, which then your ego will latch onto as the new truth, therefore making that your more dominant space to be. This is one of the reasons why when people say, how do I keep a manifestation once I've got it? Generally, my response will be, just stay being the person that has it. You don't necessarily need to do anything extra, because in theory, once it's here, assuming you don't let yourself go down that old path of fears, doubts, and anxieties, it's here to stay. Because it's your new familiar. You've redirected your focus back to having so much that that is now your new familiar, which is your new predictable, which becomes your new safety. So your ego will quite literally latch onto that new story and keep it in place unless you start focusing on other stories. Just like me now, I never affirm for Katie anymore. But this relationship just keeps going, getting better and better and better. Because my new predictable, my new comfort is that we are in a good relationship. So my human ego is latching onto that. And if I start questioning now things that are bad about this relationship, my mind will immediately go to, but look at the fun you guys have. Look how well you two have been like handling this newborn. Look at how much money the two of you make together. Look at this, look at that. My mind will immediately jump to the positives of the situation because that is my new familiar, because I've broken away from the previous familiar, which was that of anxieties, toxic behaviors and things like that when we were separated all that time ago. So the human ego, it is a neutral thing. It is a neutral thing, but where it heads down, whether it's positive or negative, depends on you. everything to the human ego is neutral. It's just unfamiliar. But the act of being broken up with to the human ego isn't necessarily negative. It's just an event that is either familiar or unfamiliar. We put the meaning behind it. Someone that loves their relationship will obviously be sad. Someone that was being in a terrible relationship probably would be happier when they broke up. So the event itself is neutral. We assign the meaning to it. So make use of that. When your ego begins to test you, overcome it by showing it that new story. So you know what? That's not true for me because insert new story is true for me. Pass that test. See it as a test. And the more that you overcome that test, the more that you place your focus on having what it is you desire to have, the more that will become more familiar. And that's when you'll start naturally thinking from that space. That's when you'll start lessening the negative thoughts that you have about things. That's when results will start to flow. That's when everything feels so much better and so much more consistent with the new story. That's when you'll feel less need to do things, because when you need to do something, you are showing a severe lack of having it, because you only need something you don't have. So when you start feeling less need to do the work, that's because all the work that you have done thus far has been becoming more familiar, so it becomes more of a want as opposed to a need. And then you can choose to carry on. And that's where everything gets amazing. And in my opinion, this is the only test that really does matter, because everything is to do with thought. Even if you did want to consider the purge as a factor, the purge is merely just the external reflecting something negative. You still have to direct your thoughts even in the purge to make sure that you go the right way. Now, I personally don't associate the purge to be a real thing anymore. I just don't want to even acknowledge the idea that I will have to experience a purge. And therefore, I have not had a purge since I stopped associating with it. Just a sort of mild side point. Make of that what you will. I'm sure there's going to be Neville fanatics out there that are going to kick my ass for that. But that's just the way that I see it. But what I can assure you is that if you overcome this test, you will guarantee your manifestations. I have never had a manifestation fail that I've really put my mind to and done the work to make the new story familiar. And there's no reason why you will either. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, drop me a like, a comment, and a subscribe down below, and I will see you lovely people in the next one. And if you want to watch more specific person stuff about presentations and all that kind of stuff, click this playlist here. Anyway, have a good one. Bye-bye.